So one particular section of the final is going to be something very similar to this, where you're going to be given an equation, and all of those equations are going to be in slope-intercept form, and you're going to be asked to find the graph that matches that equation. So the good news is, of course, that the multiple choice is helpful to help you figure out how to narrow it down, which is why this review activity is exactly like your final. So I'm going to show you how you can use the multiple choice to narrow it down. So I'm going to zoom in, first of all, on question number 1 so we can see the equation. And you're going to notice it's in slope-intercept form. And just a reminder of what that means. It is y, ooh, what an ugly y that was. Y equals mx plus b. And remember that that means that the m, and the coefficient in front of the x, is the slope of the line. And then the b, the number, the constant that's hanging out at the end, represents the y-intercept. So we can actually use the slope-intercept form and the fact that it's multiple choice to narrow it down. So if I look at the equation I'm given in number 1, the first thing I'm going to notice is the slope, first of all, is a negative slope. So that means that if you read, and you always read a graph from left to right, so that means it's going to be decreasing as it moves from left to right, which means we're looking for the slope to look something like that. And we can see here that the y-intercept is a -3. So we're looking for the place that the graph hits the y-axis, and it should be at -3. So I'm going to kind of zoom out for a moment where you can see all 4 of my choices, and I'm going to show you how you can narrow those down. So again, because the slope is a negative slope, that means we're looking for a line that is decreasing. That means it's going to look like that. So that means that we can't have option B, because this one is increasing from left to right. And option D is also increasing from left to right. So we know it's got to be either A or C. And then recall that the y-intercept, okay, the place that it hits the y-axis, should be at -3. And if I zoom back out, I notice between the A and the C that's left, this graph hits the y-axis, not at a -3, because -3 would be down here. It hits at a +3. So that one can't be the right one either. However, I'm going to double check. I'm not going to just mark A. I'm going to double check so I can be reasonably assured that it's probably right. And remember exactly what that slope of -1/4 means. It means that your rise is 1, or really in this case it's kind of decreasing 1, and then your run is 4. So let me remind you how you figure that out. So you find 2 coordinates on the line that hit in a corner. Draw your imaginary right triangle and figure out your rise and your run. Need to be careful because this is one of the oldest tricks in the book that they do on tests. Notice instead of each of these spaces counting as just 1, you're going to notice that the graph goes up by 2s because it goes up like 0, 2, 4. Okay, so in this case, your rise, so remember that is how much the graph is going, the vertical change. It looks like it's rising by 1, but that's really 2 because the scale is going up by 2 every time. So your rise is 2, your run is 2, 4, 6, 8. So rise over run would be 2/8, which does simplify to 1/4. And we already know it's going in a negative direction because the line is going down. So the slope matches, the y-intercept matches, everything matches the way we need it to. So we know that for number 1, option A is the correct answer. There is a link, if you didn't already see it, the link in the Google form that you used to find this video. There's also a link underneath it to link you to this particular worksheet. So what I would really like for you to do is take a moment to look at that worksheet, look at number 2 because it's a little easier for you to see it than it is for me on the video probably. Pause the video, try to figure out A, B, C, or D, which one is the correct answer, and then restart the video when you're ready to check. I'm going to assume that you've already done that. So I'm going to zoom in on the equation first really quickly so we can talk about a couple of things because this one looks a little strange, right? So we're looking for the formula y equals mx plus b. So for starters, the slope should be that number, that coefficient in front of the x. But if we look at this particular equation, we're not necessarily seeing something in front of the x. And remember, that means that the slope is 1. There's a 1 that's kind of understood that we just don't see that's there in front of the x. And then it also appears that it doesn't have a y-intercept because there's no second number, no constant written out there to the side. So remember, when that happens, that means that your y-intercept is 0. We don't write it because in math we like things as short as possible. So we're looking for the equation y equals 1x plus 0. So in other words, we're looking for a slope of positive 1. Ooh, that was really ugly. And we're looking for a y-intercept of 0. So if you didn't already do that, pause the video again, because I know this one was a little tricky, and then try to identify A, B, C, or D, which one is going to be the correct graph. Okay, I'm going to assume that you've already done that. So because we're looking for a slope of positive 1 for starters, that means we're looking for a graph that is going to go up in a positive direction. So I'm going to use that to narrow these down first. So it can't be A, because A is decreasing from left to right, so it can't be that one. It also can't be B. So remember B, when it's one of these straight vertical lines that is completely vertical, that isn't a slope of 1. That is a slope that is undefined. So that doesn't match what we need either. C is also decreasing, so we know it can't be that one. So we kind of know that it's got to be option D, but let me double check and make sure it's got the right y-intercept. Remember, we need a y-intercept of 0. And sure enough, it's hitting the graph right there in the middle, which means that it hits the y-axis at 0. So D is the correct answer for number 2. Okay, I'd like for you to pause the video, take a look at the worksheet or the video if you have better eyesight than me. Try to narrow it down, A, B, C, or D. Which one goes with number 3? I'm going to assume you already did that, and I'm going to go ahead and work it for you now. So if I zoom in on the equation, the slope is a positive 2, which means it's going to increase, going in a positive direction. The y-intercept is a negative 1, so that means that it should be hitting the y-axis at a negative 1. So let's see if we can narrow it down just a little bit by zooming out. And so the only one, without getting more in depth for the slope, the only one we can really narrow that we can knock out at this point is D, because D is the only one that has a negative slope when we know that the correct answer should have a positive slope. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit more on these. So I'm going to look at the y-intercept and see if that helps me. And again, the y-intercept is a negative 1. So for a negative 1, first of all, if I zoom in on C, that one is up in the positives. That's a positive 1. It's halfway in between. Notice again that these are going up by 2s, so that right there in the middle is going to be halfway in between 0 and 2, so that's a y-intercept of positive 1. So it's not going to be C, because that's not the correct y-intercept. And if I look at these two, negative 1 would have to be halfway in between 0 and negative 2. This one right here is a little too high. If you see, it's not actually in the middle between 0 and negative 2. So more than likely, it's not going to be that one. It's probably going to be A. But I'm going to check using the rise and the run just to make sure. And this one's pretty tricky too because we don't have one that exactly falls in a corner. So I'm going to go with this one that's right in the middle and that one that's right in the middle. And remember that, your rise here to here, it's going to go down 1 whole and then 2 halves. So it goes from 3 to -1, right? So that rise is 4. And the run goes right here from 0 to 2. So the run is 2. So 4 over 2 simplifies to a 2. We do have the correct slope, so that is going to be option A. Number 4, take a minute, pause the video, try it out on your own. Again, I'm going to assume that you have done so, and I'm going to go ahead and go through it. So I'm going to zoom in on the equation for a moment, and that number that we can't see right there in front of the x is a -1. So that means that the slope is going to be decreasing. The y-intercept is going to be a +2. So let me see how I can narrow that down just a little bit by zooming out. So B is not going to be correct because B has an increasing slope. We're looking for a negative. And C is also increasing. So it's not going to be that one. And now I'm going to turn my attention to the y-intercept, which remember the y-intercept is a +2. So if I'm looking at A and D, the two that I have left, D crosses the y-axis at -2, not +2 like we want it to. So that means that A is going to be the correct answer for number 4. Once again, pause the video, try it out on your own, then restart the video when you're ready. And I'm going to zoom in on the equation. So the slope is a -3 over 2, which means it's going to be decreasing. And the y-intercept is a +2. So I am looking for it crossing the y-axis at +2. So if I zoom out here, I can see first of all that A won't be correct because it has a slope that is a positive slope. It's increasing. And C isn't going to be correct either. Remember that when you have a flat horizontal line like that, the slope is 0. So that doesn't match the slope that we're looking for. It's neither positive nor negative. So now we need to turn our attention to either B or D. And we are looking for that y-intercept of 2 to see if that helps us narrow it down. And B goes pretty close to the +2, but not quite. So that's not going to be the right answer, which means if it goes through, and then here at D, D does in fact go through the 2 on the y-axis. So for number 5, the answer is D. Last but not least, number 6, pause the video, check it out, try to work it on your own. I'm going to assume you've done that, and I'm going to go ahead and work the problem. If I zoom in here, I see that I have a +7 for the slope, which means it'll be increasing, and I have a +5 for the y-intercept. And if I zoom out here, since I'm looking for a positive slope as the correct answer, that means it isn't going to be D. D's really steep, but that is decreasing. And that looks like the only one I can narrow down by exactly whether it's increasing or decreasing. So now I'm going to look at the y-intercept, which the y-intercept is a +5. B does not go through +5. C goes through -5. So neither of those is correct. Number 6, yep, goes halfway right there in between 4 and 6. So that is going to be the correct one. So 6 is A.